I had always thought that the Homeowners Association, HOA, was just one of those necessary evils of suburban life. They're there to make sure everyone keeps their yards neat, that mailboxes are aligned, and that everyone follows the rules. Rules that seem harmless at first, right? Little did I know, the HOA would be the catalyst for one of the most bizarre and entertaining battles of my life. It all started with Karen. You know the type. That one neighbor who's always in everyone's business, the self-appointed queen of all things proper in the neighborhood. Karen had been watching me from the moment we moved in. At first, it was the usual. Hey, welcome to the neighborhood. But it didn't take long for her true colors to show. She quickly became obsessed with making sure my lawn was up to her standards. Never mind that I had only been there for a couple of weeks. She had a long list of petty complaints, from the color of my front door to the way I trimmed my hedges. It was exhausting. Then one day, out of nowhere, I woke up to find garbage all over my lawn. There were bags of trash, empty bottles, wrappers, and old newspapers, as if someone had decided my front yard was the perfect place for their waste. My first thought was that it had to be some random act of vandalism. But as the days went by, it wasn't just a one-time thing. It was becoming a regular occurrence. Every morning, I found more trash on my property. I thought it was a mistake at first. Maybe a neighbor's trash had blown over, or someone was just careless. But then I started noticing the pattern. The trash wasn't just discarded randomly. It was specifically placed in certain areas of my yard. It became clear that this wasn't an accident. It was personal. Someone was sending me a message. It didn't take long to figure out who was behind it. Karen. I caught her a few times looking over at my yard from her front window. There was no doubt in my mind that she was the one orchestrating it. At first, I confronted her directly. Karen, are you the one leaving trash in my yard? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She looked at me, all wide-eyed and innocent. Oh, I would never do such a thing. How awful, she replied with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. But I could tell by the way she avoided my gaze and the slight twitch of her lips that she knew exactly what I was talking about. So, I did what anyone in my position would do. I called the HOA. Surely, they would take care of it. But that's where things got even worse. The HOA's response? Silence. They were too busy micromanaging everyone else's lives to care about the harassment I was dealing with. So I was stuck, dealing with Karen's petty vendetta, with no real support from anyone. That's when I decided it was time to take things into my own hands. I had had enough of being the quiet, compliant neighbor. Karen wanted to turn my front yard into a trash heap? Fine. But if she wanted to make me a target, I'd make sure she'd regret it. But instead of throwing garbage back into her yard, I decided to get creative. I was going to make sure Karen couldn't ignore me anymore. I would turn her petty actions into something she'd never forget. And what better way to do that than with a giant billboard? I'd seen billboards used for all sorts of things, advertising, political campaigns, and even some personal messages. But no one in the neighborhood had ever put up anything like what I was planning. I was going to build a massive billboard right in my front yard, towering over my lawn, and it was going to have Karen's face on it. Now, I know what you're thinking. This is insane, right? Who builds a billboard in their yard? But hear me out. Karen wanted to embarrass me, humiliate me in front of the entire neighborhood by leaving trash in my yard. So, I figured, why not flip the script? I was going to build a billboard with Karen's face on it, and underneath, the message would read, Karen's yard, where trash finds a home. I couldn't stop laughing as I thought about it. The idea was brilliant. I knew it would drive Karen crazy. And as for the rest of the neighborhood, they were either going to love it or at least find it hilariously bold. Either way, Karen wasn't going to be the only one with a voice in this situation anymore. But I didn't just stop at the idea. I went full throttle. I contacted a few friends who worked in construction and graphic design, and we started planning. It wasn't going to be a cheap project, but I had enough savings set aside for a moment like this. We spent the next few days putting everything together. The billboard was huge, designed to stand out, and I made sure to use a photo of Karen that I had discreetly snapped a while back when I bumped into her at the mailbox. The expression on her face was perfect. She looked exactly how I wanted her to look. Smug, entitled, and oh so sure of herself. With the design ready, it was time to build. I called in a crew to help me with construction. The plan was simple: get the billboard up, make it big, and make sure it was impossible to miss. I didn't want to just put up a little sign. I wanted this to be a statement. The structure itself took about 3 days to complete, but by the end of it, the massive frame was standing proudly in my front yard. As the day to unveil my masterpiece approached, I started feeling a mixture of excitement and nervousness. I knew Karen wouldn't take this lying down, but at the same time, I was looking forward to seeing her reaction. The billboard wasn't just about getting back at her. It was about making a stand. I wasn't going to let anyone, not even an HOA Karen, push me around. And then it happened. The moment I had been waiting for. I walked outside to see the finished product, standing tall and proud in my yard. It was perfect. It was bigger than I imagined, and it was the perfect blend of boldness and humor. I stood back, taking it all in, as the first cars drove by. A few slowed down to stare. I could hear the murmurs of neighbors beginning to take notice. And then Karen herself saw it. I could see her from my window, walking across the street, her eyes widening as she got closer. She froze when she saw it. Then her face turned an alarming shade of red as she stormed across the street toward my front door, practically stomping in her fury. I opened the door, and there she was, shaking with rage. You did this," she spat. "How dare you disrespect me like this?" I couldn't help myself. I grinned. "Oh, I thought it might be a good way for you to get some attention," I said, pointing at the giant billboard. "You've been leaving trash in my yard for weeks, Karen. I figured I'd give you a platform to express yourself." Karen's eyes bulged as she sputtered, clearly speechless for a moment. "This is ridiculous. You're going to regret this. I'll have this taken down in no time." "Go ahead," I shrugged. "But I have a feeling this is exactly what the neighborhood needed. Maybe they'll finally see what you're really like." She was fuming, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. "You'll be hearing from my lawyer," she hissed. "I'm taking legal action against you." I smirked. "You're welcome to try, Karen. But trust me, the only thing I'm guilty of here is having a little fun at your expense." As she stormed off, I could already see the first few neighbors crossing the street to take a closer look at the billboard. Some were laughing. Others were just amazed at how bold it was. But everyone was talking about it. And for the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of victory. Little did Karen know, this was just the beginning. The HOA might have thought they had control over my property, but now I had control over the narrative. And I was ready to show everyone that, sometimes, the best way to fight back is to turn the tables in a way they least expect. As the days went by, the atmosphere in the neighborhood shifted. The billboard became the talk of the block. Some people were amused, some were downright shocked, but almost everyone had something to say about it. Karen, on the other hand, was a whirlwind of rage. Every time I saw her, she was muttering under her breath, shaking her head as if she couldn't believe what I had done. But every time she saw the billboard, she just got angrier, which only made me smile more. I'll admit, at first, I didn't know what to expect. I had hoped that the boldness of the message would make Karen think twice before continuing her petty attacks on my property. But it wasn't just Karen who was reacting. I was getting feedback from neighbors, friends, and even people I didn't know. A few of my more reserved neighbors stopped by to chat. Dave, the guy who had posted the picture of the billboard on the neighborhood Facebook page, was the first to approach me. "Man, I have to admit, I didn't think you had it in you," he said, laughing. "But now that I see it, I think this might be the best thing that's ever happened to this block. You've got everyone talking." That's when I realized something. Karen's attempts to bring me down were backfiring. The more she reacted, the more she became a spectacle, and the more people rallied around me. They were sick of the HOA's petty rules, tired of the power struggle, and they were secretly rooting for the underdog me. It wasn't just Dave. People began approaching me in the streets, offering their support. Some were even taking photos in front of the billboard. It was like my front yard had become an unintentional tourist attraction, and I was living for it. But Karen? Well, she wasn't living for it. She continued her relentless campaign against me. She reached out to the HOA, sending them emails and letters, demanding that they force me to take down the billboard. She even tried to get the local authorities involved, claiming that the billboard was violating zoning laws. At one point, she even called the media, trying to paint me as some sort of neighborhood villain. The HOA, as usual, took their sweet time to respond. They were clearly caught in a bind. They couldn't ignore her completely because, well, Karen was the queen bee of their little HOA kingdom. But they also didn't want to go up against a resident who was suddenly so popular, or who had managed to turn the situation into something bigger than they had anticipated. I didn't hear anything from them for days. And during those days, the billboard's fame grew. A local news station even came by to cover the story. It was hilarious. Karen's name was suddenly everywhere, and she was none too pleased. The camera crews were more than happy to catch her on film as she stormed through the neighborhood, shaking her fists and muttering about the disrespect I had shown her. Meanwhile, my mailbox was flooded with letters, both supportive and critical. Some residents were annoyed by the billboard, claiming it made the neighborhood look bad. But most people couldn't help but find the humor in it. After all, I wasn't actually harming anyone. I was just calling out a bully in the most creative way possible. And honestly, some of the more conservative voices in the neighborhood had been complaining about Karen's overbearing ways for years. Now, they were getting a taste of her own medicine. I was also getting attention from outside the neighborhood. A few people reached out online, telling me that they'd seen the story on the news. I was tagged in social media posts by people who had driven by and wanted to take photos in front of Karen's yard. I couldn't believe it. The whole thing had spiraled far beyond what I had ever imagined. I was also getting attention from outside the neighborhood. A few people reached out online, telling me that they'd seen the story on the news. I was tagged in social media posts by people who had driven by and wanted to take photos in front of Karen's yard. I couldn't believe it. The whole thing had spiraled far beyond what I had ever imagined. As for Karen, she began to lose her grip. She was still furious, still throwing accusations my way. But she started to realize that her plan to make me miserable was failing miserably. Every time she tried to escalate things, more people were starting to see through her manipulative tactics. She wasn't just the queen of the HOA anymore. She was the laughingstock. It didn't take long for the HOA to finally send me a letter. Surprisingly, it wasn't an official complaint. Instead, it was a formal request for a meeting. They wanted to discuss the situation and figure out how to resolve the issues surrounding my billboard. They made it clear that they didn't condone my actions, but they also acknowledged that things had gone further than they had expected. I agreed to the meeting, but I wasn't about to back down. When I walked into that room, I had one goal: to make sure they knew that I wasn't afraid of Karen or her rules anymore. I wasn't just some passive homeowner, quietly following their absurd guidelines. I was someone who stood up for themselves, even if it meant putting up a giant billboard in their front yard. The meeting started as I expected. Karen was there, arms crossed, glaring at me as though she wanted to throttle me with her eyes. The HOA board members, a mix of half-interested and slightly intimidated faces, sat at the table, ready to negotiate. Karen opened the conversation, as expected. "I don't know why we're even here," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "This is a clear violation of our community standards. The billboard is ridiculous, and it's a blight on the neighborhood." I let her talk. I knew what she was doing, trying to make me look unreasonable. But I wasn't going to let her. When it was my turn to speak, I stood up and faced the board, Karen sitting across from me, still fuming. "Look," I said, "I understand that the billboard is unconventional, but it's not illegal. And frankly, Karen has been harassing me for weeks. I've been cleaning up trash from my yard every single day, and the HOA hasn't done anything to stop it. I built that billboard as a response, not just to Karen, but to the whole idea that people can walk all over others because they feel entitled." There was a pause. I could feel the board members shifting in their seats. They were caught in the middle. On one side, they had the long-standing queen of the HOA, and on the other, they had a frustrated resident who had made a bold statement. "I'm not asking for a free pass," I continued, "but I am asking that the HOA acknowledge the role it's played in enabling Karen's behavior. This isn't just about a sign in my yard anymore. It's about what's happening in this neighborhood. People are tired of being bullied into conformity. It's time for a change." Karen shot daggers at me, but I could see that some of the board members were starting to nod. They weren't entirely on my side, but they could see my point. The meeting went on for over an hour, but in the end, the HOA agreed to a compromise. The billboard had to come down, but Karen's actions were officially documented, and she was given a warning. As for me, the HOA promised to work on improving the neighborhood's standards and to better handle complaints. I wasn't entirely satisfied, but I'd made my point. Karen had been forced to face the consequences of her behavior, and that was all that mattered. I took down the billboard a few days later, but not without a smile on my face. I had stood up for myself, and in the process, I had changed something in my neighborhood. It wasn't just about the billboard. It was about the power of standing up, getting creative, and showing people like Karen that you're not going to let them walk all over you. And who knows? Maybe next time, the HOA will think twice before sending out that first complaint. As the days passed, the dust settled. The HOA had done its part, issuing a warning to Karen and promising to be more proactive in handling neighborhood issues. Karen, though furious, had learned a valuable lesson. She no longer felt as comfortable throwing trash in my yard or trying to dominate the neighborhood with her self-righteous attitude. And honestly, I think it was the best outcome I could have hoped for. The whole experience had taught me a lot about standing up for myself and not letting people walk all over you, even when they have power. And perhaps most importantly, it showed me that sometimes a little creativity can go a long way in making a point. What started as a petty feud over trash turned into a bigger conversation about community standards, personal expression, and the power of the underdog. In the weeks that followed, the neighborhood began to change. People who had once been too afraid to challenge the status quo now felt emboldened. They started speaking up about things they had quietly accepted for years: unfair rules, excessive fines, and even the way certain neighbors were treated. The HOA began to take a more active role in listening to the residents, and Karen's influence started to wane. As for me, well, I didn't get my giant billboard back, but I did get something more valuable: a sense of peace. I knew that I had done the right thing by taking a stand, and the next time Karen tried to stir up trouble, I wasn't going to be the one cleaning up her mess. I also realized something important. While Karen was still the same, there was no reason for me to live in fear or anger over her actions. The community had my back, and that was something she couldn't take away. My wife and I could go back to focusing on what mattered: our home, our lives, and the things that made us happy. So, as I sat back and looked at the now empty space where the billboard once stood, I couldn't help but smile. It had been an adventure, one full of drama, frustration, and yes, a little bit of madness. But in the end, I came out on top. I had turned an ugly situation into something that challenged the norms and brought the neighborhood together. If you enjoyed this crazy story and want to hear more outrageous tales of standing up against bullies and fighting for what's right, don't forget to like this video. And make sure you subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of our upcoming content. Drop a comment below. Have you ever had a Karen in your life? I'd love to hear your stories. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.